I know that sounds like a cue to have him come in here, but there's a lot more to say about Ambassador Bolton. As you know, in the United Nations, they made the statement, the idiotic and, of course, absurd, outrageous statement, Zionism, or equating Zionism with racism. This man put that to rest. Ambassador John Bolton, probably the only one who I think has accomplished anything in the United Nations in the past, let's say, 64 years. Because the last time anything was accomplished was the establishment of the State of Israel 65 years ago. But John Bolton is the only one since that time who's actually made a dent in the United Nations. And it wasn't only about the point that Zionism is not racism. He struck that from the record books. But he has stood up time and time again for the State of Israel at every crisis, at every need, at every turn. When Mahmoud Abbas went to the United Nations and proclaimed something sort of like a PLO state in September 2012, it was Ambassador John Bolton who opposed him. Okay? There weren't that many that opposed him, believe me. He was one. And now, to make it even more exciting, is that John Bolton has been a prophet when it comes to the State of Israel, of course, but also when it comes to the world and Iran. And if the world would only heed his message, we would be a lot safer today. John Bolton and I discussed this. Danny Donon is here, Deputy Defense Minister of the State of Israel. All it takes is maybe 4 bunker busters from the President of the United States. All he has to do is send 4 bunker busters to Israel. We're not asking for a lot, believe me. And the world would be a safer place tomorrow. It's with John Bolton's help, Danny Donon's help, of course God's help, and your help, because you will speak to the President of the United States faster than me or anyone else. Because the President is listening to you because you're here and you're standing proud and standing tall. And don't forget that. That's a very important point. That's why the ambassador is here, and that's why the Deputy Defense Minister is here. And without further ado, Ambassador John Bolton.
That's fine. Well, thank you very much. It's a great honor and pleasure to be here today and to stand with all of you to show that the American people across the board strongly support Israel. You know, I think in many parts of the world, they think that the American support for Israel is limited to the Jewish community in this country. And that is so clearly not the case that it's important to say it over and over again. Americans across the board, in overwhelming percentages, support Israel. They see it as one of America's closest allies. They see it as sharing our values and interests. They see it as part of the West. And they understand that Israel has a perfectly legitimate right to act in its own self-defense. And you know, if you look around the world today, the threats that we face, Israel and the United States together, are growing stronger. Some may say that the war on terrorism is almost over, but they are flatly wrong. The terrorists believe that the war is still on, and they're still acting like it. They've attacked our consulate in Benghazi on September the 11th, the anniversary of the first attack of September the 11th. They killed the president's personal representative to Libya and 3 of his brave colleagues. And in the 8 months since then, we have done nothing to avenge their deaths. The signal that that sends to terrorists around the world is really frightening. And the terrorists come in all different forms these days. We saw one form in Benghazi. We saw another form in the bombing at the finish line of the Boston Marathon. We saw another form in the streets of London and Paris, where people are being hacked to death with meat cleavers. This terrorist threat is growing and metastasizing. We see around the Middle East that the Arab Spring has not turned out as many hoped. that radical Islamicists and their terrorist allies are coming closer and closer to control of more governments that directly threaten Israel. We see Syria dissolving in chaos on Israel's northern border. And worst of all, Iran continues to make progress on its nuclear weapons program. You know, Iran has been trying to get nuclear weapons for 20 plus years, over 20 years. And the West as a whole, and the United States in particular, have failed to stop their continued progress. Iran's nuclear weapons are not Israel's problem. Iran's nuclear weapons are going to be the whole world's problem. And if we don't stop them from getting nuclear weapons, it'll be much more than just Iran. Former Secretary of State Clinton herself said if Iran gets nuclear weapons, Saudi Arabia will get nuclear weapons, Egypt will, Turkey will, and perhaps others. So that the threat of one more nuclear weapons state in the world will grow rapidly to perhaps another half dozen. If the government of Pakistan collapses and radicals take control there, they will have access to Pakistan's existing arsenal of nuclear weapons, and that threat will be worldwide. Now, we have tried over the years everything we could think of to stop Iran's progress. We've tried diplomacy, we've tried sanctions, we've tried bluster, we've tried helping the opposition. None of it has worked. And the reason is that the Ayatollahs in charge in Tehran are determined to get nuclear weapons. Now, we have heard presidents of the United States say that all options are on the table. I have bad news. The Ayatollahs in Tehran don't believe that. They don't think the United States will use military force. And that's why the spotlight is on Israel. Not because it's just Israel's problem, but because Israel alone may have the willpower to act. You don't have to wait. You don't have to wait to be attacked by nuclear, chemical, or biological weapons. It is a legal and moral responsibility of any democratic government to protect its citizens from threats of violence. And if that means striking preemptively, that is a legitimate exercise of the right of self-defense. Israel has twice before struck nuclear weapons programs in the hands of hostile states, first against Saddam Hussein in 1981, and back then even the Reagan administration criticized Israel. Not until the first Persian Gulf War, when we saw how close Iran was to getting a nuclear weapons program, did we understand how valuable that first Israeli strike was. And then second, in September of 2007, destroying a nuclear reactor being constructed in Syria. Being constructed by whom? By North Koreans. North Koreans who never do anything for free. Who do you think was financing that nuclear reactor in Syria? Obviously, it was Iran. And so we come to the point of vulnerability that we face today with Israel looking at the risk of a hostile state developing an existential threat. You know, that phrase gets used a lot. Let me tell you, nuclear weapons in the hands of the Ayatollahs is truly an existential threat. And as Ariel Sharon first said, brings with it the prospect of a nuclear holocaust. Now, I don't expect anything in the next 3.5 years from the United States, but I think Israel is facing a critical decision point, And I think what the United States can and should do is support Israel now, support Israel with the necessary weapons systems, weapons, and finance so that they can make a decision that's clear-headed. We should support Israel during the attack by providing intelligence and other measures like that. And perhaps most importantly, if, and I underline the word if, Israel makes this very difficult decision, we should stand by Israel politically and militarily afterward. We should be making the case now that it is a legitimate exercise of self-defense to stop a hostile state from getting weapons of mass destruction. We should defend Israel in the United Nations and everywhere around the world. We should immediately resupply Israel for any losses that they sustain over Iran, and we should do whatever is necessary to suppress Hezbollah and Hamas and any other terrorist group or state that tries to retaliate against Israel. I don't know what decision Israel is going to make. It's a very, very difficult decision with Israel's entire civilian population at risk. But I will say this, the government of Israel should know that if they decide to act, as they have acted twice before, that the overwhelming majority of the American people will stand with Israel, whatever it takes. Thank you very much.
Picture.
Thank you.
Come here. Brody has to be here. Malcolm Siegel, get in.
Yeah. I'm a little bit straight.
Okay, we're going to do Danny Danone now. Get in the